Welcome everybody to our On the Move podcast. My name is Alan Clelland. I'm a member of the Board of Management of the City of Pasadena's Community Access Corporation. Now that's the parent organization of Pasadena Media. And I'm a 24-year resident of the City of Pasadena. I'm pleased to be the host of this, the third of Pasadena Media's monthly On the Move podcasts. And we explore mobility issues within the City of Pasadena. Our goal is to provide information to our community on current issues of interest, present new ideas, and take an occasional look at Pasadena's history and so how we got here. And that's just what we're going to do today. Today's podcast is just that, as we look at transportation developments happening in the early years of the last century, the 1900s, early 1900s, and some interesting parallels with some of today's top issues. My guest today is Bradford Macneil. Bradford is Curator Emeritus of the Pasadena Museum of History, having recently retired from very successful 20 years of service at the museum, which included the role of Director of Education and Public Programming for the museum. Together, we'll look at the impacts on mobility in Pasadena in its growth years of the early 1900s. Brad, welcome to our On the Move podcast. And I got to start by saying how I thoroughly enjoyed the discussions we've had building up to this in talking about the topics. I can see opportunities for future podcasts already, but let's focus on the early 1900s to begin with today. Can you set the scene for our audience in terms of the city in general and factors affecting what I understand to be a key growth period for the city?
Yes, Alan, thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Transportation in the city, it has a fabulous history. I was involved with a exhibition a couple of years ago called Starting Anew, Transforming Pasadena from 1890 to 1930. So this is this amazing period of time, these 4 decades, where the population of Pasadena went from a little less than 5,000 to over in 1890 to over 75,000 in 1930.
What a growth.
Incredible growth. And I was able to compare it to the growth of other cities in Southern California, and the growth rate is quite amazing. Why this happened? The city went from a small agricultural community and developed into a famous winter resort and a bustling young city, all in this period of time. And many of when people think about Pasadena, many of the characteristics come from this time. Some of the great architecture, some of the great institutions. For example, the City Hall complex, the Rose Bowl, Caltech. Lots of the architecture. Pasadena, of course, is famous for its diversity of architecture, and a lot of that happened during this time. Wonderful houses and buildings that were erected during that period. So as far as transportation, use your imagination and think about what was happening during this period of time, 1890 to 1930. How much was changing from a technical point of view? What new technologies were being developed? What new inventions were affecting everybody?
Exactly, yeah.
Amazing time. In some ways, I think it's sort of parallel to what's happening to us now if we took the last 50 years. But of course, you had electricity coming in. You had the telephone coming in. You had the automobile coming in. All sorts of different new things with medicine. So it was a very exciting time to be alive, and people's lives were changing, being affected by this change in technology. Pasadena attracted, well, first of all, people came to Pasadena because it was a really beautiful place. Even back into the 1870s, people were visiting Pasadena from the East Coast, coming and falling in love with just the natural beauty of the place. And as a lot of people know, many people came west, and they came to an area like Pasadena for health reasons. Supposedly it would help you if you had any sort of lung problems. And so that there was that draw to it. But what happened in Pasadena, again, it was a small agricultural community. The city, Pasadena, was incorporated in 1886. And it was sort of founded, this is, of course, after the Native Americans and the Spanish and the Mexican period, but Easterners came out in the 1870s, basically with a they wanted to get out of the cold winters. So, and they actually, a lot of the people that came out, the first members of what they called the Indiana colony, were from Indiana and Ohio. And they came out here hoping to grow oranges, and they basically,
not far from orange grove.
This was perfect. So there was a small agricultural community, but then people started coming to sightsee, and then there were these grand hotels that were built, and these really attracted wealthy people to come. The big change in transportation was the railroad that came in the mid 1880s. And that made it very easy for people to come. And that's really helped. It affected the number of people that came in. They were having a railroad wage war, or rate war. And you could actually come from St. Louis to Los Angeles for under $5 at one time, which was amazing. Because
Really?
Originally it would have been about $7-5, which in 1890 was a lot of money. So anyway, Pasadena developed into this winter resort. You had these fine hotels. The population was growing. A lot of the wealthy people that came here and stayed in the hotels decided to build winter homes here. Oh. The city was growing up, and it created a great opportunity for anybody coming to Pasadena. If you were a business person, if you were a professional, there were just jobs left and right during this period of time as it grew. And so that the city really started changing. Now, a lot of the people that came here were very well educated, had traveled the world, and there were visionaries who really dreamed of what Pasadena could be in this beautiful setting with the natural mountains and where you can grow pretty much anything if you had water.
If you have water, yes.
Yeah. So the town just grew and grew. Businesses grew. There were hordes of hotels, and families started moving here. It was just a great place to come for employment and to raise a family and prosper. So going back to transportation, and I love this subject because when I was doing the exhibit, Starting Anew, I really went through the museum's images and found all these great images of how people got around in the early 1890s and early 1900. And one I loved was downtown Colorado Street. And you had, the city had grown up, you had built, this would have been shot about 1900. So there would have been about 10,000 people in Pasadena at that time. And in this one image, you see people walking, you see people still on horses, people in their horse and carriage or in their horse cart. You see bicyclists, you see cars. It was just amazing, all on the street at the same time.
And
then don't forget about you had streetcars.
So red car.
So all of those different ways to move were used by the populace.
Amazing. And you said electric cars were coming in.
There were electric cars, and it's interesting. In the early 1900s, electric cars were very, very popular. It's a fun story that at the museum there's it's on a great old estate that was on Millionaires Row on Orange Grove in Pasadena. And there's a beautiful mansion that was built by Eva Scott Fenius and her husband. And they both had electric cars in the early 1900s. Actually, Eva, one time, she was driving up Lake Avenue in her electric car, and she lost control and ran into a storefront window. And then with investigation, it was found out that she had been reading a book at the same time that she
distracted driving.
Right.
Driving in the 1900s. There's nothing new, is there?
No, made the front page of the Pasadena Star. So anyway, now bicycles, and I know that's a big issue in the city today. We're looking at how we can improve people getting around on bicycles. During the turn of the century, it was bicycle crazy here.
Really?
Again, the population of Pasadena was very wealthy. One of the highest wealth levels per capita in the United States. Not that everybody was wealthy, but there were some very, very wealthy people there. But people could afford bicycles, and even say in 1900, there were. When the population was about 10,000, there were over 15 bicycle shops in the city. And there were bicycle clubs. There was the Crown City Bicycle Club. There was also motorcycles. There was the Pasadena Motorcycle Club, too. Both of these are, the Motorcycle Club is still going. It's over 100 years old. But people fell in love with bicycles, and one of the main reasons is because bicycle technology had changed, and they went, the old high-rise bicycles, the big, gigantic wheel.
Yes,
well, they'd
20 farthings type stuff, yeah.
They created the safety bike, which made it much easier for everybody to ride.
Of course, yes.
So there was a big lobby to make better streets, have better signage, just improve the roads for bicyclists.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
It sounds awfully familiar.
Yeah, it does. It does. There's another story, if we want to stay on bicycles, it's a fascinating story. Have you ever heard of some people call it the Dobbins Cycleway?
No, until you mentioned it in one of our conversations.
So the Dobbins Cycleway was, it's called that, it was a dream of Horace Dobbins, who came to Pasadena in the 1880s. And he wanted to build a beautiful, elevated bicycle path from Pasadena, starting at where the Green Hotel is today, down to South Pasadena to where the Raymond Hotel would be located, and then all the way into Los Angeles to the Plaza.
Downtown?
Yes. So basically,
right into downtown.
Right into downtown, and so you can imagine how beautiful that was at the time. It basically would take the path of the Pasadena Freeway today.
I was going to say the Arroyo.
Yes,
Pasadena Freeway.
Yes, the Arroyo Seco Parkway, because it used to be so beautiful on both sides. So he wanted to build an elevated wood bicycle path. And all the way down, and he wanted you'd be able to go both ways. In the middle of it, sort of almost down toward the Southwest Museum area, he was going to have a very large pavilion, elevated again, where you could hear live music. They would have a restaurant. They would have places for people just to rest with a beautiful view of all around.
Stunning.
And then it would go all the way into the plaza, Los Angeles Plaza, where the old church was, the Catholic Church. which was a center part of Los Angeles at the time.
And this was bikes only?
Well, it was basically designed for bikes, but electrical vehicles were coming in, so he was not opposed to it. In fact, we have a picture of him in his electric car on the bikeway, which I think you can show later on in the show. But it was mainly built for bicycles. But things were changing, and his dream never was completed. He was able to build the bikeway from the Green Hotel down to the hill where the Raymond Hotel was in South Pasadena. So only 3 or 4 miles.
From where the Castle Green is at the moment.
To if you know where the Raymond restaurant is.
Yes, exactly.
And that big hill, that's where the big hotel was. And then he ran into trouble. He had, he called this the California cycleway. But things were changing. People were getting interested in cars. There were also Henry Huntington was building his red line,
yes,
and he ran into problems with right-of-way and legal fees, and he backed down. He did have a grand opening in 1900, and hundreds of people rode their bicycles on the cycleway down to South Pasadena, but he never got any farther than that. He did keep the right-of-way, though. So his family was later able to sell the right-of-way to the state. So that's a fascinating story.
So was the support from the city of Los Angeles for this?
No, this was an entrepreneurial business deal. He was going to charge, I think it was 25 cents for a one-way. So what was 25 cents in 1900? Well, but that was but he felt it would be a money-making adventure or enterprise. Now, of course, in the bicycle shops, again, I said there used to be 15 of them. One famous one, the building for one of the most famous bicycle shops is still here. It's the Braley Building.
Oh.
Where today Scientology is.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and that, if you ever have been inside that building, it's really a beautiful building with a big central courtyard, and that was all built to sell bicycles.
Really?
Yeah.
There's that much demand for them at the time.
There was indeed, and I've. In doing my research for the exhibit, I was looking at maps of bicycle trails throughout California, and there were so many, just all over the place. So again, bicycling was just taking off. And, I mean, it's always been somewhat popular, but sort of gone up and down.
Well, yes, yeah.
And now I think it's coming back.
Yeah.
Imagine what a elevated bicycle cycleway would be like today if you could find the right place to do it.
Well, trying to get that support for it to be installed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that's one of the key issues here.
Yeah.
And it's still the trade-off between bikes and cars.
But again, you're lifting the bicycles up above off the street somewhat. So there was a movement in the early 2000s to recreate the Dobbins Cycleway. There, in fact, a wonderful individual was curated. I mean, and I just forgot his name. Anyway, they were looking at building a cycleway right along the Pasadena Freeway. And there was still a lot of parkland that you could do that. They were working with the state. They were having artists from the Art Center help design things. And they got together and in a weekend, they stopped all traffic on the Pasadena Freeway so that people could walk and stroll and ride their bike and see what it was like.
Yes.
it unfortunately didn't come out. Dennis Crowley, is who I'm thinking of, was a wonderful bike enthusiast and promoter of bicycling.
But I'm thinking back to those times, and I think we actually have photographs of the structure, what was built. But you're talking about the city in growth. So you've got part of the city's already established, and you're coming in with Dobbins is coming in with something which had a major impact, really, on infrastructure.
It did.
Was there anything else being impacted by changes in the infrastructure? I mean, because if there's more cars coming onto these streets that were used to horses on bikes and pedestrians.
Well, there was. And again, as more people bought cars and cars became very popular, they found out that some of the streets weren't adequate. Colorado Boulevard was a real mess with all of these different modes of transportation on the street. In the late 1920s, they decided to widen Colorado Boulevard, and they went from about 70 feet to 100 feet. Now, what that meant was there were buildings on both sides.
Yeah.
They basically had to take off the fronts of the buildings and put new facades on after that. So the architecture somewhat changed in like 3 years. It went from more Victorian to more Art Deco, Spanish colonial design. It's the facades that you see on the buildings today.
Yeah, because the buildings today are a result of having removed the front and moved the fronts back.
Correct.
To create more space for cars.
For cars, yes. And did we solve the problem? I don't know.
Well, we encourage the problem.
Do we have too many cars in Pasadena?
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, at the same time, it's the red cars are being replaced by, are being taken off the roads completely.
Exactly.
Because
the system of the red cars, if anybody wants to do research on it, is just amazing at how convenient and how widespread the whole system was all over Southern California.
Right.
But you could catch it numerous places in Pasadena and hop on, and it would come about every half hour, and you could go all over the place. There was another famous railroad in Pasadena, the Mount Lowe Railroad.
Yes.
And this was went up in our local mountains in the Altadena Mountains, and this was a dream of Thaddeus Lowe, and in the late 1800s, who had come to Pasadena to retire after making a fortune as a inventor. He had a home on Millionaires Row on Orange Grove. It was the largest home west of the Mississippi. He was a phenomenal inventor, but a terrible businessman. But anyway, he wanted to build this fabulous railway up the mountains, which he did, and it had numerous hotels. You could take the red car up to the base of the railway, get in what they called the white cars, and go up an incline railway at a very high angle, and then get on another trolley cars and wind all the way up to the top of Mount Lowe today. And there were, again, it had hotels, it had an observatory, it had a zoo, tennis courts. People would come up and they would stay the weekend for dances and just to get out of the city. Of course, incredible view of all of the San Gabriel Valley,
yeah, absolutely.
And then all the way out into the ocean.
And all these people dependent mainly upon public transit to get there.
Well, that's the only way you could get up there unless you wanted to hike or, ride.
You're not going to cycle up there.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I wouldn't be surprised if people were trying to cycle up.
But it sounds like the attempts to improve access to Dodger Stadium. It's a lot of the same kinds of technologies and modes of transportation.
And unfortunately, so we lost the Dobbins Cycleway, which never got built. And Mount Lowe the railway is no longer there.
No longer
so we've
there.
lost those.
Yeah. And of course, we're getting excited now about improved connectivity on Metro Rail. and services, transit services, to make it easier to get to different parts of LA County on transit.
And of course, Metro Rail, a lot of their right-of-ways are the old red car routes. So we're building...
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating, yes. Anything else that would surprise the audience that Pasadena was involved with in transportation at that time?
Well, there is an interesting story of, we haven't talked about air transportation.
Oh my goodness.
So there was a famous airfare, international airfare held in Dominguez, where Dominguez Hills are right now, in 1910. And people came from all over the world with their flying machines to be in this show. And they were, so all sorts of airplanes, and a lot of airplanes that were built in garages in Pasadena all came, and they had all sorts of...
That's a concept in itself, airplanes being built in garages in Pasadena.
Imagine this, because most people had never seen an airplane at this time, and they're coming and they're seeing all of these airplanes. And they had races to see how fast you could go, races to see how slow you could go. Could you fly backwards? But they also had dirigibles and hot air balloons. And so there was a famous aviator named Roy Knobenschuh who brought his dirigible to Pasadena in the early 1900s. And if you can imagine a really big pickle with a cart below it, that's what it was. He had a small little engine, and he would take people up for rides all around, charging them $25 for a ride. And this could be a 15-minute ride.
Significant, yeah.
But anyway, so that was exciting.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And all this going on at the turn of the century.
Indeed.
Stunning. And impacting the infrastructure, and just as the infrastructure is being impacted, and transit's being considered, and bikes, of course, provision for bikes now, and how do you maintain the access for cars? So it's...
And then, of course, we have to be looking at the changing technology of what cars will look like or even bicycles.
And last month's On the Move podcast was about EV charging, so we learned all about that in Pasadena. Right. Well, thank you very, very much, Brad, for that fascinating glimpse into Pasadena history and transportation.
My pleasure, Alan.
And I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today, listening to this, watching it as well. And I recommend that you look forward to future episodes of On the Move too. Thank you.